I like the moral seriousness with which you take fun, because I do feel convinced that especially when we get too much into like a pattern of just surviving and just getting through the day and just checking off all the boxes, even if in seasons that's entirely what's necessary, it really is like watching your life turn to grayscale.
Yeah.
And I've seen a lot of people, and sometimes it happens in seasons like grief, and then you hear and then I love hearing stories about how they got out of it, like how they sort of started painting in the colors of their life. And sometimes it's like, man makes birdhouse. Man decides, I could make another birdhouse.
Right.
Man decides to make many birdhouses.
Right.
But like slowly along the way starts to figure out a feeling that you're describing. And so I started really thinking about your argument about what, if we were like putting aside if the fake fun makes us feel not satisfied, not quite, doesn't have like an aliveness and a satisfaction, maybe makes us feel a little bit depleted or meh, then like, then what do you think, what are some descriptors for fun? If people, because I do think that if people have had a hard time, they might not even know what to look for. If you're like, because you're not saying like, well, just go have fun. You're like, no, it's actually kind of hard to figure out what
like the
fun
worst advice ever
feels like.
Right.
So how does it feel, do you think?
Well, I think it's important to define it, right? So I created a survey for people on my mailing list and asked people to send in stories of past fun moments that stood out to them as having been, quote, so fun, because I didn't really have a better way of describing it.
How fun?
So fun. And the "so" was capitalized in the Google form. And I ended up with thousands of these stories. And through the process of this survey, I asked people to share these stories, which, as a side note, this was happening the first summer of lockdown for the pandemic. So it was a really interesting time.
It's a very unfun time.
It was not the funnest time.
Historians will say.
Right, exactly.
This was not a fun time. That time of mass death was not a fun time.
And like not being able to see anybody. So it was
Yeah.
like totally isolated, like sending out Google forms. But anyway, in my Google form, I was like, tell me about, these stories of past fun. And then tell me what you think your definition of fun is. And then several pages in, I was like, okay, here's my proposed definition. Like, what do you think? And my proposed definition, which people did agree with, which was really cool, was that true fun, as I think of it, happens when we have a confluence of three states. And those are playfulness, connection, and flow. And so adults tend to really react strongly to playfulness, especially adults who've got serious careers, like emotionally heavy careers. So I want to stress, it doesn't mean that you have to play games. Like, I'm not saying go out and play charades or do something like that. It doesn't even necessarily mean silliness.
Hopscotch for everyone.
Hopscotch for everyone, exactly. It means just having a lighthearted attitude and being able to find things to laugh about and not taking yourself too seriously. So that to me is very different from like forcing people to play, Jenga or something. And then connection was really interesting because even though some people did describe stories where they were alone and they had fun, most of the stories had another person in them. Sometimes dogs, but mostly people.
Yeah.
And I also asked people, did anything about the stories you just told me surprise you? And I don't even know why I asked that question, but it was really interesting because a number of people said something along the lines of, like, I'm an introvert, but all of the stories I just told you had other people in them.
Yeah.
So it made me think it's not so much about whether introverts like people or not. It's more just like, what kind of interaction are you going to find fun in a bigger group or a smaller group? And then flow is the state when you're totally engaged and present. So we think of it as being in the zone. An athlete playing a game, a musician playing music.
Yeah.
Those are examples. But even when you're engrossed in a conversation or a work project, but the big thing about flow is you have to be completely present and actively engaged. So it's destroyed by distraction, and it's not the same as the zoned out feeling you get when you lose track of time because you've been watching a TV show for like 7 hours. It's really active. So each of those are great on their own, but that center of the Venn diagram is what I think of as fun.
Yeah.
And so the thing I really love about that is, going back to what you were asking, is that I think we tend to think about fun as something that happens separately from, quote, real life or like our normal life, or it takes a lot of money or you need to have a lot of time. But if you think about it instead as being the feeling that comes from these three states, the playfulness, the connection, and flow, you can start to realize that you're probably already having fun, little moments of fun, like a passing interaction with someone on the street. Maybe that was a moment of fun.
Yeah.
And then you can also use that as a way to engineer more fun by just trying to figure out, are there any ways I can build more playfulness or connection or flow into my life?
Yeah.
Any of those is going to be great. And then if all three happen at once, you will actually experience fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You asked like a little diagnostic kind of questionnaire, like try to think of the last couple times that you had fun.
Yeah.
And I think that's such a great exercise. I I did it. I did your inventory,
Oh, did you?
and my husband did it, and he's very introverted, and so he also had the argument before where he was like, well, I just would prefer to be by myself, and then when he did his like, so the questions, one of them was like, when are the like, name the last 3 times you really, really felt like connected, playful, and in that kind of flow place, and for him it was the last time he played pickleball.
Pickleball's a huge thing.
It really just, and
so
like,
funny
they
that
didn't even
some-
have to be friends,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And that was really encouraging for him. He closed your book and was like, I think I might be kind of good at having fun.
Oh my
And
God.
I was like, wow.
That makes me very happy.
Surprising and exciting. I had a harder time because I couldn't, I love people, but I couldn't exactly figure out something that I hadn't also just made into a project immediately. Or,
Yeah.
because it is hard to have the like, so the ones I came up with were, last week I got to officiate somebody's wedding.
Oh.
She's actually a past podcast guest.
Oh my
So
God.
later on, just at any time, if you need
okay,
any
if
kind
I
of
need a
official
second
capacity.
wedding. That's really good to know.
Yeah, I mean, I strongly encourage you to stay in the marriage you have, but also just if any other rituals that come up,
Vow renewal. There we go.
I'll insist. I'll
Okay.
just send a weird email in here. You might not remember me, but I'd really like to be part of your future and intimate moments. But she's it's Christy Watson. She's a nurse and an amazing person. But her wedding was so ridiculous, and I thought, oh, I'll just be so nervous. I've never officiated a wedding. There's a lot of people here.
Yeah.
It was in England. I don't think I'm good with formal people, to be honest. It's like not exactly my strong suit. But it went from like the surrealness of watching 2 people be so in love that it creates these ripple effects everywhere. And then meeting their amazing friends who were all ridiculous and fantastic. And then the dancing and like people, I love intergenerational dancing. I find when like the unlikely people come out on the dance floor and they're just gonna get it done.
Yeah.
It slays me. And so I'm not a great dancer, but I find I'm like crying and laughing so hard. Because I also just really like when someone attempts a joke dancing based on 1990s hip hop. So, oh my gosh. I was like done. And then when I looked at my watch, I was like, oh, I got to get on a plane in a couple hours. And I was like, fun. And then the last time was, because I was like, well, crap, that was amazing. And I can't replicate that. I can't be like, Tuesday, time to do another vow ceremony. But I was hanging out with my best friend's 2 little kids, and we were in the pool and making up. And it just kind of slowly became like, we're throwing a ball. Now we're pretending every throw has to have a different Taylor Swift song. Wait, now we're adding a dance. And then it was like an hour and a half later. And I was like, yeah, weird playfulness, just messing around.
Yeah.
Somebody else.
Yeah.
Their energy. And then kind of just sort of not feeling quite so uptight about like, when are we getting out of the pool? Has everyone eaten? That kind of feeling.
Yeah, that feeling of freedom. I mean, also that story exemplifies how you don't need to spend money to have fun, and you don't need to go anywhere because you just had a ball. Right? I mean, you literally and metaphorically you had a ball. Actually, balls are very fun, which sounds weird to say, but it's like I actually put that in my book because I had a really fun time that pandemic summer actually in a pool outside, like just trying to catch balls like while we jumped off the diving board.
Yeah.
You know, so that's a quick tip to fun is do stuff with balls. But I actually have juggling balls in my bag here right now. Yeah, just so you know.
This must be part of the Exhibit A.
Exhibit A.
This is the
Exhibit
appendix.
A. Exactly. Yes. But no, I think that, well, first of all, hearing you talk about fun is very energizing to me. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about fun is just hearing other people talk about fun is delightful and energizing. You lit up when you were talking about it. And actually, when I asked my daughter, when she was about 5, I asked her, I don't know why I asked her this, but I said, what color do you think fun would be? And she goes, sunshine. And I was like, oh my God.
It is.
Just like, oh, it is. Give me a tissue. But I think it's so true.
Yeah.
So I would say if any listeners like trying to figure out like trying to figure out what was fun. I mean, laughter is a great sign that you're having fun, but also if you just feel like a sunshiny kind of energy. But it doesn't always have to happen in situations you might think of as being fun, like a wedding dance party or even just playing in the pool. Like you could make arguments that those sound kind of like fun things. But if you're interviewing someone for your podcast, like I would think there's moments of like, I mean, right now I'm having fun, right?
Yeah,
like
me too.
when you're laughing with someone and having an engaged conversation, but you're also doing your work.
Yeah.
So that can happen there. I also want to emphasize that fun is a feeling and it's not an activity, which is something I think we get wrong about it all the time, because we typically think that, like,
Yeah.
if you ask someone what's fun, a lot of time they'll give you a list of activities they find fun, and pickleball is often one of those activities. But anyway, I'm sure even your husband would say, like, some pickleball games are more fun than others, even
Yeah.
though it's the exact same game. It's like equally kind of absurd each time, right?
Yeah.
This is pickleball, but like or if you like another thing like dancing, right? There's some weddings where it's like really fun to dance, and other ones where you're like, well, that was okay, but it felt a little forced.
Yeah.
So I really like to emphasize that, because it kind of takes the pressure off people from trying to shoehorn in more activities to their schedule.
Yeah.
And recognize that no, you're just trying to put yourself in more situations where you're likely to have this feeling.
Yeah.
And I think there's two ways to do it. One way, you can kind of like engineer that by actually figuring out the things that are likely to lead to that feeling and then making time for them. And then the other way is to kind of deliberately try to make space in your life for more serendipity, because you also have a serendipitous aspect of fun where you can't always predict it.
I guess that has happened to me a fair bit in the hospital when I'm like just supposed to be having the worst day ever.
Yeah.
But even like the last time I got blood work, I don't know what started it, but we started going on about like somebody always has a crazy cousin, and like it became like a really insanely elaborate him pretending to be his cousin asking me for money.
Oh, wow.
And it was like,
You were like
because I'm
role
getting
playing with
this.
a phlebotomist.
I was role playing with a phlebotomist. This is
Okay.
exactly what happened. He was like switching between accents. I couldn't stop laughing. It was just I loved knowing that somewhere out there someone's always really annoyed at someone in their extended family.
Right. But
And
also,
I want to think about that.
I remember a story a friend of mine told me about her own experience with fun. Her father had a stroke, and she's really close with her father, and his face was paralyzed, and I think part of his body as well. But she was telling me this story about visiting him in the hospital and about how she was trying to help him eat, and half of his face was paralyzed, so the food was kind of dribbling out of his face, and he could still move his eyes some, and it was like obviously awful and sad, but they made eye contact and kind of had this moment of recognizing how absurd this was. And they both started laughing, or as much as he could. Like, they had this moment, and she herself said, she's like, it sounds like such a strange example, but that moment was a moment of fun with my father. Like, we connected with who he actually was, before the stroke. And so I guess I just point that out, that even in terrible moments, you can feel, it doesn't need to be like, again, silly, or it doesn't need to be, all pickleball. Just any moment when you're like really connected with someone. And you just share a smile, when you're both totally present, I would count that as a moment of fun. And I think that speaks to how healing it can be. And, I think we write off fun as frivolous, which I think is really important to challenge as a notion. Because in reality, I mean, fun is energizing, as we were just talking about. But it also does all sorts of like wonderful things in terms of uniting us, like really feeling connected to another person. And then you see them as a person instead of as, a political party or race or whatever might divide you. You actually are humans together. And like, that's so amazing. And I also think it's interesting because we're so obsessed with happiness as a culture, right? And that, first of all, so amorphous. Like, what is happiness? But what I started to realize in the stories people gave me about fun is that every moment in which we have fun is a micro moment of happiness. And so for me personally, I was like, oh, well, maybe that means instead of trying to be happy, whatever that means, if I can just try to have more fun, and by that I mean focus on playfulness, connection, and flow, I'll be happier without having to torture myself over this state.
This pretend equilibrium that proves that we have achieved the bonus level of being a person.
Yeah.
It feels like a great finding a place for fun, even if, and maybe especially if life is difficult, sounds like I just really like what you just said about if you're not just stuck on this like happiness paradigm that the best part of the ideal goal is to crowd every single emotion into only one quadrant. And it's like contentedness and a placid smile. But that like, if we introduce more deliberate space for fun, that there can be more of a dynamic relationship in our lives between like, okay, now I'm doing the hard thing. And in the hard thing, I can notice the moments that are lovely and hilarious, but mostly hard. And then maybe make a little bit more, because I think just finding reasons to be joyful in that way is, I think it is hard, especially when you settle into the idea that like, I'm just not the kind of person who does that. And I wonder if maybe we could go over a couple of those arguments, because
Okay.
I'm just thinking if I don't have a lot of fun in my life, then I might want to say, like, well, that's just not my personality, Catherine.
You're not
I'm
a
just
fun
not a fun
person.
person, and you're a fun person, and I'm not a fun person.
I don't always feel like a fun person.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, one of the questions I asked people in the survey that I did actually was about fun people,
Yeah.
quote unquote fun people. And I said, describe to me a couple of people who are fun people, quote unquote, in your life. I think we typically think about the fun people as being these extroverted kind of class clown types.
Cody. There's always a guy named Cody.
Right.
He's hilarious.
Yeah, hilarious Cody, that's what they call him. But what was so interesting is there were some people like that, but a lot of people described quote unquote fun people as being people who made you feel comfortable to be around, or who always made people feel included or comfortable in their presence, or people who themselves laughed easily, so they weren't making the jokes, but they actually just laughed at stuff.
Cute.
You know, it was stuff that introverts can do just as well as, and maybe even better than extroverts in some ways. And I thought that was really interesting, because I think we need to, challenge the notion of what a quote unquote fun person is. And you can be fun in a number of ways. I'd say if there's anything that prevents people from being a fun person, it's like criticizing people, or letting your own inner critic be really loud, or, always saying no, or always trying to push back on people instead of going with the flow. Like, those will be fun killers. But the other thing I thought was interesting is that the descriptors of quote fun people, none of them were like genetic. It was all behaviors that we all could adjust. So if you are someone who typically is really critical of other people, that's something you can work on, and you might be really surprised at how much better it feels and how much more positive energy and positive interactions you have if you don't do that.
Yeah.